thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be presenting to such an illustrious community. And I'm a relatively new member here, but I'm very happy to be talking today. I bring to you an academic perspective on cybersecurity and also an academic perspective which is not based in a lot of technicality of the cyber world. My name is Ruchi Goyal, and as you can see on your screen right now, is as some of you might already know, and maybe all of you might be familiar. This is the screen from okay. Yes, the WannaCry infection that had happened, the ransomware that had happened in 2017, which is a very infamous one. So this was how it had taken over. And this was just to bring back the attention back on what we are going to be talking about today. We're talking about cyber incidents. Um, and let's begin. So my name is Ruchi. I tell my students I'm a lecturer at University of Exeter on the Cornwall campus, and I tell my students to the phonetic way to call my name is just Gucci with an R, so it's easier to remember. Today I'm talking about cyber incidents and what we can learn from them from an organizational perspective, and the idea is that. Cyber incidents, I'm talking in a very broad sense because incidents could be attempts, it could be breaches, it could be, all sorts of them and everything in between. So we are trying to, let's get started. Um, Before we go any further, what I'll do is I'll just kind of give you a little idea of what I'm going to be talking about today. It's ideally, essentially three pillars. And to top that, we are going to start with a little bit about the study. So my talk today is based on research that I've done. I'm a lecturer in the university, but I'm not teaching cybersecurity. It's my personal, not personal, but academic interest in cybersecurity. And that too, from a managerial or a governance perspective, because I have a huge background in industry, but again, that's also not about cybersecurity. So my research has been in cybersecurity, and that's what today's talk is based on. And when we talk about the topic, there are essentially three main things. And one is first just to making sense of the cyber incidents, what they are. Next, we're talking about understanding the damage that they cause. And probably I should give a disclaimer that there's definitely going to be content here that a lot of you are probably familiar with. But I do understand that our cybersecurity community is a very diverse and uh, community with a lot of different interests and different perspectives that people might have. So, at the cost of repeating, saying something that you probably are already familiar with, I'll go ahead and continue with my topic. So after we look at the damage that cyber incidents do, we're going to typically organizations are left in a very sad state of affairs. Incidents have even been called traumatic. So, but the usual idea is that if you talk cyber incidents, that's something sad, and that's pretty much it. The idea of my talk is to actually think of it that these are learning opportunities for organizations, and what is it that they can learn from them to probably avoid them in the future. And finally, I'll wrap it up with a conclusion, and I can leave the floor open for questions at that point. At any point, if you have questions, just stop me. I'm happy to take questions during the talk. Okay, so a little bit about the study itself. So, but the nature of my study is purely qualitative, and so there were no questionnaires, but it was an interview-based study and study or research, whatever you want to call it. And it's focused on cybersecurity governance of it. So not just in terms of how our organizations managing it day to day operationally, but how our organizations looking at it from a strategic perspective. And because we were talking strategy, my interviews were all they were all online, and depending on the availability of participants, they ranged from 30 to 75 minutes. And these were all board members who are based in UK. Now, these individuals are based in UK, but they have prior experience from US or Europe or whichever different geography of the world. But they're currently based in UK. and it was a host of board members, chief executive suite, or people who are running their own cybersecurity companies, for instance. So my data has been collected from such people and it's been analyzed to, talk about this topic today. Just a little, again, background into the kind of people I interviewed. So instead of tackling one particular industry, I try to keep a very heterogeneous mix so that there's a good balance between industries. So there was, of course, people from different industries, but also there were people from the public sector as well. So it's not just private sector who are looking at it. Okay, so continuing on to the study. So first of all is of course, the cyber incidents, making sense of them. Now, essentially, one way of looking at it is about what are the reasons that cyber attacks really happen. And I think as far in the past as crime goes, profit has been one of the biggest motivations. And from that perspective, cyber attacks also will have profit as one of the very big motives. And a very simple example is probably very close to us, or in the UK, is probably the Royal Mail attack that had happened a couple of years ago. Another motivation is also recreation, just because people can actually do it. For an example for that could be, this is probably the most infamous one, really old one. This was, I think, in 98 or 99, but where a teenager had hacked NASA because he simply could. And that was the thrill of it. So recreation is another motivation. Revenge sometimes comes into the play because people are trying to seek revenge for something. And one of the recent examples from our recent times is with the Ukraine-Russia war. The IT army of Ukraine has come up with this particular motive, and so a lot of experts who probably not even Ukraine nationals have got together, created this army, and they've run very conscious, deliberate attempts at Russian infrastructure, uh, primarily based out of their, view of revenge. Another motivation is, of course, ideology. And this is a little different from revenge, but this is more, I don't know, probably their idea of principle or something like that. Their ideology was hurt. So, and an example for this is the Sony Pictures one. These are all very different in time sort of examples, but these are one of the ones those became very infamous in their time. So Sony Pictures hack, as we all know, was the one where the North Korean leader was sort of his respect was hurt, and that's why the Sony pictures were hacked. And of course, there's another motivation, which could be prestige. The fact that it is, it gives a person some sort of bragging rights to say that they had been hacked. And Uber, now this Uber hack was also a couple of years ago, but this was not, the customers weren't affected. This was the internal server within Uber, and of course, it was the employees. And I don't remember very in details, but probably there's Slack, which had been attacked. And again, this was, again, slightly similar to the recreation, but probably just to say that, hey, I hacked Uber. So these are motivations. Next is a very quick look at social engineering attacks. And by no means this is exhaustive, because the more I put it, the more kind of social engineering attacks that come up. So we have, of course, baiting, which is, luring the target with promised goods. We have phishing, which is very common. And of course, we have wishing, and we have smishing, and I don't know how many of those that are coming up, which is targeted to obtain information from a user, of course. We have spear phishing, which is more targeted, and whaling, which is also targeted, but at bigger fish, so to speak. So this is just a very quick look at the social engineering attacks. And similarly, there are the vulnerabilities that are exploited by cyber criminals. So what kind of attacks there may be. So it could be proximity access when, of course, the adversary is trying to connect through the victim's network. It could be remote access, insider access, supply chain access, and denial of access. Now, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are probably the primary ways where cyber criminals have had been able to perpetrate cyber crimes. That was a lot of making sense of cyber incidents, and now we move on to understanding the damage that comes from them. So obviously, we talk about organizations having financial issues and probably even legal issues. But there's one way of sort of classifying the losses, which is one could be loss of confidentiality, it could be confidential information that gets exposed. Obviously, in a bigger sense, it could be just the loss of integrity that breach has caused. Loss of availability, which I think is one of the worst reasons because there's downtime and people can't access their work or their computers. And of course, there's a whole lot of indirect losses. So, because indirect losses is sort of a broader category, it there's more information on what sort of indirect losses there could be. So, one, of course, is compensation, because when an organization has been attacked and its stakeholders' information has been breached, then the company needs to pay out compensation. So, in the case of Yahoo in 2020, 194 million of their users' information had been breached. So they had to shell out £100 million equivalent in compensation. Legal fees could be another reason why companies have to suffer, and this is Equifax, which had to pay out more than £65 billion to lawyers just as legal fees because their US customers had accounts, the information had been breached. Penalties is again another one, and especially for our part of the world with GDPR, I think this becomes another concern for organizations. So, for a failure to establish appropriate processes and failure to launch correct deficiencies, organizations can have to pay. And of course, Capital One Bank is one example which had to pay out almost £57 million in 2019. And finally, like we talked about, downtime costs. So there's one report that says that an average breach, while it can range from nanoseconds to probably years, on an average, once a cyber criminal has had a breached an organization, it has access for about 200 days. There's also values associated with how much money does it cost to per minute to an organization. So, in terms of numbers, there are also some other numbers here. So, for instance, the global costs of cybercrime as of 2025 have been estimated at $10.5 trillion. If we look at the top 2,000 companies, their downtime costs are coming from cyber incidents is ranging around $400 billion a year. So the idea becomes that organizations really need to look beyond just purchasing or employing people who can have cyber expertise. So then the topics of cyber resilience comes into play, and so does cybersecurity governance. So I think it's the organization that is talking about cybersecurity governance beyond cybersecurity management will be more likely to manage a cyber incident better than one which is holding it strictly to cybersecurity management. Um, and finally, we come on to the aspect of potential lessons. But why are we doing that? And from this is actually a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, who's one of my favorite philosophers. And this is a quote which I'm very sure you've heard before in song or text. So the German text translated obviously means, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." So, if we look at it from this philosophical standpoint, cyber incidents also have that potential to give us important lessons for future. And let's have a quick look at them now. So, one is essentially the idea that one does not have to go through it oneself to learn something important from these incidents. And because there's such a huge plethora of cyber incidents happening practically every day, it's a great opportunity for organizations to learn from somebody else's incidents. So these are excerpts from my interviews, which is not just this particular excerpt, but this is one of the excerpts that leads to this sort of lesson for this study. So this was the CEO of a data security company who said, and when somebody else gets breached, whilst we have that empathy for our peers, we also need to take advantage. And a breach that somebody else suffers is almost gold dust because it gives you an opportunity to look into your systems and the people you're working with and systems and see what they're doing. So it's a really good opportunity to essentially look into your own companies, look at your mechanisms, look at your practices, and look at where there might be a possibility to make some improvements. Another lesson was the very fact that these are great opportunities for learning. So um, there was a director from a cybersecurity company who said that, of course, I mean, obviously, there's lots of lessons. We can learn everything from the Maersk compromise all the way through to the WannaCry attack in the NHS. The idea is that, of course, all of these incidents, whether they have been small, whether they have been big, whether they have been merely attempts that have been prevented, they can act as great opportunities to understand what might need to change. Another lesson was the fact that it is more than an IT problem. Now, in my interviews, I found that a lot of people look at cybersecurity as a very technical and IT related topic. Unfortunately, that still prevails. A lot of board directors, for that reason, sometimes feel completely um, out of their comfort zone because they've expertly managed companies for 30 odd years, 40 years. And sometimes they feel that, oh my God, cybersecurity is just not my thing. I don't know the lingo. I don't know the jargon. And in that case, sometimes that's how the company also is going to be treating at cybersecurity or looking at maintaining their cyber defenses. In which case, it becomes really, really important to understand that cybersecurity is not just IT and it needs to be looked at with that comfort. So, an insurance company non-executive director talked about the fact that it's kind of an HR failing more than it is maybe an IT failing because you hired the wrong person or he hasn't got the right training. We did this. It's not as simple as saying it's just an IT problem. I think it goes across the whole business, which essentially goes back to the fact that you're looking at it as an organizational failing, and the way you look at law or legal aspects, the way you look at HR aspects. So it's not just an IT thing. A lot of companies, if they leave it to the IT department, obviously would not perform very well. And finally, or probably the most important one, is the organizational reputation. We were talking about losses a few minutes ago, and a lot of losses make sense because we can put them down to numbers. We can talk about finances or financial losses. But organizational reputation is a very, very intangible concept. And organizations that have worked probably for decades can sometimes just lose it overnight, not just because they were hacked, probably uh, stakeholders are much more kinder because cyber attacks are so common. But if an organization has been hacked or hasn't had an attack, and they're not able to manage the whole incident well, that can also lead to a bad reputation. So that was another understanding from this CISO from an internet service provider. I understand CISO is primarily an American term, but it's so prevalent now that I think everybody might be familiar with it, of course. It's about gauging how the company handles a problem, how open and transparent is the company, how communicative it is when it comes to individuals that have been impacted by it, about the measures that they took to resolve the incident, but also what measures are they taking to prevent it from happening in the future. So get all that stuff right, people will effectively forgive the breach. So that's another very important lesson to learn, that if you are really focused on keeping your organizational reputation intact, then cybersecurity and maintaining good cyber defenses becomes another avenue to explore that. So this is sort of the end of lessons for now, as far as cyber incidents go, but I'll wrap that up with a quick conclusion. So this is just sort of a simple flow chart based on my research. So when we look at cyber incidents, there are three main varieties that I had found. So there could be incidents that other organizations around you, it could be your rivals, it could be your competitors, it could be people in the industry, people in your same geography who have had incidents, and there's an opportunity to learn from them. There could be small self incidents, which could be things that had not created a catastrophe for you or your organization, but they act as an experience of a cyber incident. And of course, then there are the bigger ones that you or your organization has gone through. It could be a current organization, it could be a previous organization. For non-executive directors, it could be one of the organizations they have been connected with. Together, they combine all sorts of cyber incidents that an organization can have experience with. These can act as opportunities for learning, which is what we looked at, learning from others' mistakes, learning the lessons, vital lessons that come with it, the fact that it is beyond IT, and it directly relates to the reputation of an organization. And if these things can be put right, then it obviously leads to good cybersecurity for the organization, which obviously leads to a lot of advantages and sometimes even a competitive advantage. Um, so to wrap it up in terms of points, this one I think was very, very interesting as part of my research, which probably must be very obvious to some. But I came across this quote from an ex-FBI director, Director Mueller, who had said that there are only two kinds of companies in the world. One, which have been hacked, and two, which are going to be hacked. So it kind of brings forward the idea that cyber incidents are not a question of if, they're a question of when, which means that the sooner one accepts them as inevitable, the sooner it's going to be easier to figure out how to manage or govern them. So, of course, most medium and large organizations are facing cyber threats on a daily basis. Um, the idea is to be able to get a handle on preemptively managing it and figuring out how to manage that preemptively so that you can adapt to how to manage the aftermath of it, what processes need to be in place and what needs to be done. Cyber incidents are helpful if we are able to learn lessons from observing our peers. If we are also able to reevaluate our organizational cyber mechanisms and practices, what needs to change, whether it's insurance, whether it's certifications, whether it's actually the systems, whether it's legacy systems, what exactly is it that's causing the problem? Or that could be a vulnerability which we don't want to expose to cyber criminals. They're also really good in triggering board level conversations where board members really start discussing that, hey, I need to talk about it. I can't shy away from it. Also, if a cyber incident has happened and an organization has managed it well, then they also earn favorable reputation from their stakeholders, which obviously then translate into financial ways. And also something that I haven't touched much on my today's talk, but it talks about the importance of regulations. For instance, it varies by geography. Like in the US, I think reporting of incidents is still not part of the required requirement. So somewhere organizations which do that earn good reputation, but it also brings out the idea of what regulations might need to be in place for better cyber defense for tomorrow. So with that, I've come to an end. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your patience, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have.